Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about literacy in the age of Google. At a time when most of the world's information is on the internet and can be readily accessed through search engines such as Google, how many people really know how to use these search engines effectively and get the most out of them? Here to answer that question and show us how to better utilize these tools is my guest, Daniel Russell. Daniel is a research scientist at Google, where he studies how people search for and organize information and then turns that knowledge into better search quality and greater user satisfaction. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Rochester in New York and specialized in artificial intelligence until he realized that his real passion was understanding human intelligence. He worked at Xerox PARC, which originated the graphical user interface for personal computers. He was in the advanced technology group at Apple, where he wrote the first 100 pages for the Apple website, and he recently created a MOOC, or Massive Open Online Course, called Power Searching with Google, which had over 150,000 registered students. Dan, welcome to the program.
Great. It's great to be here, Marty. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, when we talk about literacy in the age of Google, what are we talking about? Are we redefining the whole concept of literacy?
Well, if you think about literacy, it's kind of this old idea that's been around, and the traditional dictionary definition would be something like the ability to read and write. Well, what does that mean in the age when everything is digital, when everything is online? Can you read and write video? We are here, but can most people do that? Or what does it mean for them to read and write all the different kinds of media? So I do think it's time to be reassessing what it means to be literate. In the age of Google, when you can reach out and contact hundreds of millions of results, what does it mean to be able to find something in a single book? I think it's different.
Is it harder to be literate in the age of Google? Does it require more on the part of the user than just reading books?
Well, I think, this is what I dream, right, is that being literate now means that you have a deeper understanding of what the content is. So in essence, it's really kind of a thinking about what it means to think critically about stuff. Because people will go onto the internet, do a simple search, get back the first result, and it's total nonsense. How do we get people out of that sort of mode of thinking and thinking more deeply in more interesting ways about the material they do find?
Now, you spend a lot of time studying Google users to find out how they do their searches and how they organize their information. What have you found? Have you found anything unexpected in the way people use it?
My job is really to understand how people use Google and the kinds of ways they use and misuse that information that they do get. So my job is one unending series of surprises. It's really interesting to watch people as they use Google because they'll do things that seem silly, right? They will do queries that are ostensibly on topic, but are really wacky and way off topic. And so that's the first thing that surprises me.
I mean, people use Google just for fun. Like sometimes I'll be on my computer and I'll have the television on and I'll hear a name on the TV that I don't know, so I'll just look it up right then and there.
I think that's fine. It's completely appropriate, I think, to use Google for fun. But what I'll see is people not necessarily typing in the person's name, but they'll type in something sort of way off topic. So a story I tell is about watching a 6th grade kid trying to write a report about the Costa Rican ecosystem. And his query was sweaty clothes. And it's true when you're in the jungle, you get sweaty clothes, but that's not a great way to find out about the jungle. So that's what I mean by having sort of mismatched queries that don't match the query intent. That is what you're trying to find out.
So you need some sophistication about how to word your query.
Sophistication is calling it too much. It's just making a kind of clear sense out of your information intent. So if you're trying to, for example, find out something about Costa Rica, say Costa Rica. That seems obvious,
I would think so.
You would think, but I've seen people, time and again, not include sort of really salient keywords in their query. And that's kind of crazy.
Now, is Google something you have to learn how to use? Most people who use computers probably think they know how to use Google. They enter a search string and that's it. But I gather that to use the full power of it, you need to do something more than that.
Right. Well, Google, I think, like a lot of high technology, suffers from the Lake Wobegon effect. Everybody thinks they're better than average. So what I find actually is that people kind of plateau out. They start using Google, they learn 1 or 2 tricks, and that's it. That's the end of their learning experience. But in fact, there's a whole lot more power there if you could only spend a few seconds to learn how to do it or experiment. So it's a little bit like having Formula One race car drivers teaching the mechanics how to drive. Sure, any mechanic can drive a car, but they may not be able to get that Formula One around that race course at that high speed. So it's a little bit of skill, but it's not hard.
Now, you do a lot of lecturing on this topic, and you have a slideshow, which takes about an hour and a half under normal circumstances, but I think you brought a few of your slides with you. Maybe we could take a look at some of your slides and you can explain them. That might be better than just talking about it.
That'd be fine. Let me show you a couple of slides to get started. So I usually start out my talk by giving an example of the old technology. So this is the old technology, and when I was a kid, when you were a kid, we would go off and learn the information access procedures for this technology. Okay? Now, what this meant is this is a giant compendium. This is actually a collection of codices. And here's another way to think about it, another kind of document. This is the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature.
Which is an index of everything ever written, pretty much.
In the magazines and journals, right? As opposed to the libraries. And so what you see down there on the right is that that's a periodic update that they would do. They would send out new books and append them to the end. So to actually look through the last, say, 5 years meant going to 5 different sections, maybe 10, depending on how often it was updated. So when technology changes, a fundamental thing happens. The way we use that technology changes. And so this cartoon captures, I think, the essence of this very nicely. When you think about the access time to get to information in the library, it may take you a long time. It may take you minutes, maybe hours. Google, pre-Google, the world was different. You got stuck, what would you do? Well, you wouldn't go to the library. Now you pull out that tablet, like you were saying, pull out the tablet, pull out your phone, pull out your laptop, and you would search for it.
So it's all at our fingertips now. It makes it a lot easier.
That's right. It's at your fingertips, and it's rapid to access. So we're talking on the order of seconds to find out a question, the answer to a question. So here's the same Google result for that query we were looking at earlier with the Reader's Guide to Periodical Literature. This is that same query for high technology industries. And what we've got here are, 216 million results. That's better than the 12 results we saw in the book. So what I really wanted to try to get across in my talk is this idea of informacy. Now, literacy, if you think about it, is talking about, to be literate means to talk about texts. Informacy is being literate about information. And so information is this bigger, more sort of a malleable concept. So
Does that mean that you don't have to know anything, you just have to know where to find it when you want it?
Well, you have to know a little bit about that when you're using a traditional library, too. You have to know what sections there are and so on. So what I mean by informacy is that you know what information is and how you can combine it. Because one of the great things about being on the internet and using a search engine like Google is that you can pull pieces from many different locations and pull them together and build something larger than just individual answers that you might think of. So the notion of informacy is really doing something like this. So here's a large page, the 10K results from a recent race. Now, if you ask someone to find out how long it took this person to run in the race...
She's presumably on that list.
Trust me, she's on that list. And I've asked a lot of people to find out how long it takes, how long it took her to run that race. And people who know how to use the Control-F trick, you know the Control-F trick?
To find something.
To find something, yeah. Control-F, you type Control-F, and you type Beth Assange, or just the last name. And it jumps immediately to that point down in the document. And if you know that trick, it takes 2, maybe 3 seconds to find how long it took. If you don't know that trick, average is 12 minutes. 12 minutes. That's crazy. Or, in the worst case, people never find it at all because they're going line by line. But that's a kind of informant skill. See what I mean? If you know how to use Command-F or Control-F or Edit-Find, you read documents differently.
Now, how do you learn how to do that? I know now some people, like the kind of people who read manuals when they buy a new computer, like they'll go through all the menus and they'll examine every menu selection and they'll say, what does this button do? What does that button do? And they'll just learn by doing it. But I gather not everybody does that. They don't want to make anything complicated. They just want to know a minimal amount.
Well, you're right. There are some people who read the manual and there are some people who explore every single button. Most people don't. They're not like you and I. They're actually worried. You know, there's a button here. I'm not sure what that label means. I'm not going to click on it.
Maybe it'll break something.
Maybe it'll break something. Exactly. You can't believe the number of times I've heard that when I've interviewed people. I don't know what it does. I'm not going to touch it. Maybe it will bring people back from the dead. So I'm not going to do that.
Now, something else that's useful is what's called tooltips. Not everybody knows what tooltips are. Maybe you could say something about that.
So tooltip is a way of taking your mouse, moving it over an item on the screen in the user interface, and it usually will pop up a little pop-up piece of text saying, this button does that. So that's a way of exploring. And that's what I try to get across to a lot of people, is this idea that you can explore the interface. You can explore how Google works, explore how all these internet applications operate. Because if you're not exploring, you're stagnant. If you're stagnant, everything's moving past beyond you.
And I think it's important to realize that the creator is trying to make it easy for you.
Right.
He's trying to give you features that enable you to do easy searches. So you have to think like the guy who designed it and say, how do I want this to work? What would be easy? That's probably the way it actually works.
That's right. Although there's an interesting challenge for software designers, because software designers tend to hang out with other software designers, and so they tend to think that that's the way everybody works and everybody thinks. Truth is, you know, that's not the way my mom thinks. That's not the way my cousin thinks. And so we have a challenge in the software industry to take the incredible plastic nature of software and make it into something that everybody understands. I encourage people to be exploratory and check that stuff out and try different things. And it's kind of a mindset.
Now this gets into the whole concept of learning. You know, people start in school around age 5, maybe a little younger these days, and they're given material and they're expected to learn it. But do we need to teach people how to learn? Is learning itself a skill that you have to acquire before you even start gathering information?
Well, I would say yes, actually. You know, one of the tendencies we have is that learning is innate, and to a certain extent it is. But there are styles of learning that are more productive than others. So there's in sort of the neuropsychology of this, there's a whole area called metacognition. And metacognition is when you're thinking about your thinking. So what that means is that you might, for example, I could show you a way of reading where you're constantly asking questions and you're thinking about the process of reading and asking critical questions. If you're skilled in that, then you're a better reader, a better thinker, and more able to use the resources on the web.
Now what about pattern recognition? Because that's a large part of what's considered intelligence, recognizing the way in which two things are like each other or unlike each other. Is that something that you can teach people how to do?
That's a little harder. Pattern recognition, as we normally think about it, is kind of an inherent property of brains, an inherent property of minds. And we have, for example, very strong pattern detectors that detect faces, that detect particular kinds of sounds, particular kinds of interactions between objects. So if something bumps something else, I see a causal connection. That's a kind of pattern recognition. But on the internet, all the patterns are new, and so you have to, there's nothing hardwired for that. So you have to learn how to recognize patterns. So for example, when you see a long body of text like this, you recognize, oh, that's the pattern. I can use the Control-F trick.
Now what can you say about the way Google organizes its own information? Because if you enter a search query, it will find a lot of things that are very similar to that.
Right.
So it must have some organizational theme. And it doesn't just have to be text that you enter.
That's right.
You could enter sounds, you could enter pictures. In fact, I think you might have some examples of that.
I do. Actually, let me show you an example of that, if that's all right. Let's go back here to my Google homepage. And one of the things you can do that a lot of people don't recognize is there's a pattern here of being able to search for an image. So for example, I've got here in the upper right corner, I'll open it up. This is a picture of something I took, and I had no idea what it is. So the question is, how would I use Google to find this? So the simplest way to do this is actually, let me get rid of it there, I'm going to search for images. So I'm now clicked on Google Image Search, and most people don't know this trick, but I can search by image by taking that icon, that image, and dragging it here, dropping it into that box. It uploads it to Google Image Search, and it compares it against the vast library of images that we've scanned. And you can see here it's found another image just like it, and it tells me it's the foam pail wrench. So you see up here, that query at the top? Foam Pale Wrench is the best query to bring up that image. Now, a foam pale wrench is, it turns out, what that thing is. And I never would have figured that one out.
And I have no idea what a foam pale wrench is anyway.
Well, I'll tell you, it's actually, when firefighters go and generate foam to put out fires, it comes in pails. It comes with a lid. You need this to take the lid off.
I did not know that.
See? But it took me, what did you say, 2-3 seconds max to figure that out?
Now, there must be billions and billions of pictures on Google.
Yeah.
Does it compare it with each one to say, this isn't a match, this isn't a match, oh, this one's a match?
Effectively, that's what it's doing. What it's actually doing is algorithmically a little bit more sophisticated. What we do is when we scan those images, when we're crawling the web, we pre-compute a pattern, and we do a very fast, rapid pattern match. That's how we do it so quickly.
What are some of the other capabilities of Google that people might not be aware of that they could use if they knew about it?
Well, there's a lot. So for example, let's do another query here. I'm going to just go back to the home page, and let's do another image search just for fun. One of the features that a lot of people don't know about is the ability to look at images by color. So let me look for Rosa Parks book. And what I'm looking for here by doing these image searches is I'm looking for book covers. Now, let me scroll down a little bit, and you see this set of pictures, this little set of icons down here. I'm going to click on the red one there, and now I'm filtering by color. That is, all these pictures here, in particular for the books, are books that have a predominant red color. Really handy when you're trying to find pictures that match a particular theme. So, did you know you could search for book covers by color?
Actually, I did not know that.
Right.
And it looks like you can also search by size. You can sort them by large pictures or small pictures.
Exactly. Or by time. I can filter out, I can look for things just in the past 24 hours, or the past week, or 2 years ago.
Since they've been uploaded, you mean?
Yes. So this would then filter on the time that we scanned it. It could have been uploaded, say, a year ago, but if the Google Spider actually discovered it last week, then it would be written down as being updated last week.
Now, you can also search according to sounds, right? And if your browser is equipped for it, you can speak what you're searching for, and it'll interpret that and convert it into a text query.
That's right. What we've got is the ability to, for example, look at, or rather listen to different kinds of things, and it's just like speech recognition on your phone, right? So I could say, for example, Pacific Northwest tree octopus.
Which there's no such thing, obviously.
Well, that's an interesting point, right? We were talking about pattern recognition a second ago. One of the patterns people need to understand is this genre on the web of spoof sites, okay? This is a spoof site. And if you don't know that, if you don't know there are parodies and spoofs like that on the web, you might very well be in the 7th grade and turn this in.
As your term paper.
Exactly, right? Or you might very well do a search for Vikings and talk about the football team, right? Rather than the barbarians coming from the north, part of my ethnic heritage. But you get the point. If you don't know those patterns exist and you don't think about these things critically and don't have the kind of metacognitive skill, who knows what you're going to come up with.
Can you do things like hum a few bars of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony and have this identify it? You know, that's still and come up with the orchestral version.
Yeah, that's still an active research topic. There are exploratory systems people have built to recognize certain kinds of music. And there are tools out there right now you can buy for your phone that will allow you to listen to pre-recorded or copyrighted music. And we do the same trick as we do with the pictures. We take a few samples of the sound, encode that, and then do a signature comparison to find the matches. But it only works with, right now, with copyrighted sound that's already in the library. Humming it is still in the realm of difficult research problems.
Well, how does Google know what features to add? Does it work with the users and ask them what features they'd like to see, or do they just say, well, we know what people need, we'll just add it?
Well, yes. That's the short answer. It's a little of all of the above. So, for example, one of the things that we'll do is in research we'll see new pieces of technology, new capabilities come up, and we'll think, what can we do to use that? And then we'll figure out a way to get that in, and that's a technology-driven impetus. Another one will be, in my research or other researchers at Google will discover needs that people have, or latent, implicit requirements that they can't even articulate. So for example, one of the best stories there was nobody, when we launched Google years ago, said, oh, we need spell correction. Well, we launched spell correction, and it turned out to be massively successful. I don't know about you, but I often use Google to do spell correction for words I can't quite figure out. And it turns out that that has helped search, the property of search, the quality of search, more than almost anything else. But nobody articulated that. We had to see it in the misspellings we were getting in the search queries.
Now, very often if you're entering a query and you mistype something,
Right.
it'll say, well, we think you really meant this,
Right.
because
That's right.
we haven't seen a query like the one you entered, but if we change one letter, that's a really common query.
Right.
So is this what you really meant?
That's right. So that's what I mean by spell correction. And that works in multiple ways, but it almost always gives you the right one. And one of the things about learning how to be a better searcher is that it's important in some cases to know how to overcome that, how to turn it off. So in that case, if you're looking for, say, a family name that has a funny, unusual variant spelling, you'd put double quotes around it. So double quote, word, double quote. And that tells Google, don't try to spell correct this. Give me exactly this word, this spelling, nothing else. So it won't try to help you out in a way that,
Right.
in this case, isn't helpful.
If you enter two words like a first name and a last name without the quotes, it might find an example of either name in the document but not connected.
Correct. That's right.
Whereas if it's in quote, the two words have to appear together.
That's right. So that's a phrase search. So if you're looking for, say, Daniel M. Russell Google, you'd say double quote, Daniel M. Russell, double quote. And that's a phrase search. So it will look for those terms in that sequence.
Do you think Google actually affects the way people think? The fact that you're using this tool so much actually changes the way the individual absorbs and processes information?
I think more important is that every tool we build changes the way we think. So, for example, you and I both wear glasses. I don't know about you, but 200 years ago, pre-glasses, I wouldn't have my job now. I couldn't be a scribe, I couldn't be a literate person because I couldn't see what to do. So the technology of glasses has changed my ability to be a scholar, and probably yours too. So I think every kind of information technology fundamentally changes to some degree the way we think. Does it change us neurologically? Probably not. We still have, the visual parts of our brain. We still have the auditory parts of our brain, the motor neurons. That's all kind of the same stuff. But it's important to remember that even Plato thought the technology of writing was a bad idea, and that's 2,000 years ago.
Yeah, I did not know that.
Yeah.
Didn't he write a bunch of stuff?
He did write a bunch of stuff, but his teacher was Socrates, who was illiterate. Did you know that? He actually couldn't read or write. It was up to his student Plato to actually write this, and in the book Phaedrus, he writes that the technology of writing is only an aid to reminiscence and not actual intelligence.
I guess a lot of technologies were ridiculed at first, and then they became really useful.
And then they become standard, right?
Yeah.
Right. So when books were first introduced, for example, there were two interesting problems, one of which was that students could read their own books. They didn't need the lecturer, because lecture means to read aloud, right? And so it was taking away the power of the instructor, the power of the lecturer to interpret that knowledge. The second thing that happened was people were suddenly flooded with books because the cost of that technology drove the cost of the books down to a point where you could actually cut them up and paste them into a document. And it wasn't until the Gutenberg printing press revolution that the cost of printed text became low enough you could actually cut and paste. And that's where it started.
Now, speaking of massive information, this brings up another interesting topic because you're the creator of a MOOC.
That's right.
And a MOOC, M-O-O-C, that's an acronym for Massive Open Online Class. So you've created a MOOC which attracted 150,000 students online.
Well, that was the first one. That was the first one. We actually ran it again recently, and we had 127,000 sign up for the second class.
Well, that's still pretty impressive.
It's over 250,000, so it's not bad, right?
Right. So the question is, how does that work? Does that incorporate some different technology? I mean, how does that make it easy for people to, and the subject of your MOOC is power searching with Google.
That's right. Well, you kind of knew that was going to happen. The beginning of it was basically starting with the observation that I was seeing people not being able to search effectively, and I thought, what can I do to help? And so I went around and I was teaching courses all around, teaching librarians and teaching teachers and so on. And we put together the MOOC, which is really a kind of sequence of very small lessons, and this is key. The lessons are short video segments, 5 to, say, 10 minutes in length.
Not too intimidating.
Not too intimidating, that's right. I try to keep my ideas very straightforward so I can communicate them. I do a lot of demonstration. And then we have a short video, and then we have a small assessment. So did you actually pick up what I taught you in this segment? We have a midterm, we have a final. And the thing that surprised me the most is we also have, with each lesson, an associated discussion forum, so an online discussion forum. And I thought, with 156,000 students, I'm going to get killed in office hours. But it turns out that the people in the class answered each other's questions. And it makes a lot of sense because they're all in the same boat. I know this material, but they can explain it to each other in ways that make sense to them because they're newbies to this. See? And what's fascinating is that that giant class worked well. We had a bunch of people graduate, and we ran it a few months later, and we had another 127,000 sign-ups.
So this is sort of a new paradigm for education, a new way of learning.
I think that's right. I think it's right. With things like YouTube and things like the Khan Academy and MOOCs from us and from other places, you're seeing a kind of inversion of the normal order. People are learning at home, and they're going to class in order to actually have that conversation, which is difficult to do in a lecture setting. So it's the beginning of sort of what's called the flipped classroom, a different way of teaching.
It's a lot cheaper than going to an expensive college, too. It sounds like it really could be revolutionary.
Yeah, I think so.
We're actually going to have to wrap because we're just about out of time, unfortunately, and we could talk about many more things. I'd like to thank my guest, Daniel Russell, research scientist at Google, studying how people organize their information and search for it and putting that into Google products so it'll be even better in sort of an accelerating cycle. Dan, thanks a lot for being here. It's a pleasure interviewing you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next time and visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. For Future Talk, I'm Marty Wasserman. See you next time. Hey, we have that. There we are.